November 24, 1944. 1:47 p.m., 3200 feet above Tokyo Bay. Flight Lieutenant Saburo Sakai pulls his Mitsubishi A6M0 into a climbing turn, engine screaming at maximum power. The altimeter needle quivers past 9,500 meters. His oxygen mask freezes against his face. Through frost-covered goggles, he watches the silver belly of a B-29 Superfortress slide past, 500 meters above him, untouchable as the moon. His vision tunnels. Gray creeps in from the edges. The B-29 doesn't change course, doesn't descend, doesn't even seem to notice the dying fighter below. Before we continue with Saburo's desperate chase, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to 32,000 feet above Tokyo, where Saburo Sakai was about to lose consciousness. Sakai's fighter stalls. The nose drops. He tumbles through freezing clouds, gasping into a mask that delivers ice crystals instead of oxygen. When he recovers at 6,000 meters, the B-29 is gone, continuing toward its target as if nothing happened. Between November 1944 and March 1945, Japanese Air Defense Forces recorded 847 interception attempts against B-29 raids over the home islands. They succeeded in shooting down 43 bombers, a 5% success rate. But the real statistic was worse. 219 Japanese pilots died attempting those interceptions, not from American gunners, from their own aircraft failing at altitude. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't reach, in an environment that killed them before they fired a shot. Saburo Sakai was 28 years old in November 1944. Born in a fishing village in Saga Prefecture, he joined the Navy at 16, dreaming of nothing more than steady pay to send home to his mother. By 1944, he was one of Japan's most experienced fighter pilots. 64 confirmed victories, survivor of Guadalcanal, legend of the Southwest Pacific Campaign. None of it mattered at 10,000 meters. Sakai stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighed 118 pounds, half blind in his right eye from a wound at Guadalcanal that should have killed him. He'd learned to compensate, turning his head constantly during combat, using peripheral vision on his good side. Against wildcats and corsairs in the tropical Pacific, he'd been a shark. Against B-29s in the frozen stratosphere, he was drowning. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress entered combat in June 1944, operating from bases in China and later the Mariana Islands. It was the most expensive weapons program of World War II, $3 billion more than the Manhattan Project. Maximum operating altitude, 33,600 feet. Cruising altitude over Japan, 32,000 feet. The problem wasn't the altitude itself. Japanese intelligence knew B-29s flew high. They'd photographed them, studied fragments from crashes, interrogated captured crews. What they didn't know, what American operational security concealed until it was too late, was that B-29s had fully pressurized cabins. The Superfortress was the first operational combat aircraft with cabin pressurization. Crew compartments maintained sea-level pressure up to 30,000 feet. American gunners, bombardiers, and pilots operated in shirt sleeves, breathing normally, minds sharp, hands steady. The aircraft had heating systems, insulated walls, oxygen that flowed rich and pure. Japanese fighters had none of this. A Mitsubishi Zero at 10,000 meters, open cockpit covered by a sliding canopy. No heating system, no pressurization. Temperature inside the cockpit, minus 40 degrees Celsius. Oxygen supplied through a mask connected to a bottle that often froze at altitude, delivering nothing but frost and broken promises. At 30,000 feet, atmospheric pressure drops to 1/4 of sea level. Every breath contains 75% less oxygen. The human brain begins dying in minutes. Fingers go numb, vision narrows, decision-making collapses. Fighter pilots called it altitude sickness, but the medical term was hypoxia, suffocation while still breathing. Sakai's best friend was a pilot named Hiroyoshi Nishizawa. They'd flown together since 1942, two farm boys from nowhere who became aces. Nishizawa had 87 confirmed kills, the highest score in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Americans called him the Devil for his precision, his impossible deflection shots, his ability to appear from nowhere and vanish like smoke. They'd made plans for after the war. Neither believed in victory anymore, not by late 1944, but they believed in survival. When this is over, Nishizawa said one night in the barracks, "I'm going back to Nagano. My uncle has an apple orchard. We'll work together, you and me. Fresh air, no one shooting at us. We'll get fat on apples and forget we ever saw an airplane." They shook hands on it. Nishizawa died on October 26, 1944, at 800 meters over Luzon, attempting to intercept a formation of B-29s. His zero reached 500 meters, his altimeter frozen, showing 8 Izuo. He blacked out from hypoxia, tumbled inverted, and never recovered. No gunfire, no damage to his aircraft. The wreckage showed his oxygen system had frozen solid. He was 24 years old. Sakai learned of Nishizawa's death 3 days later, reading a casualty list pinned to the squadron ready room wall. Just a name, just another number. He walked outside, lit a cigarette with shaking hands, and watched a formation of B-29s pass overhead, clean silver crosses glinting in sunlight, 30,000 feet up, unreachable. That night, Sakai sat alone in the empty barracks, staring at Nishizawa's bunk. The blanket still held the shape of his friend's body. On the wooden shelf above, a photograph of an apple orchard in Nagano. A place neither of them would ever see. "I'll figure it out," Sakai whispered to the empty room. "I'll find a way to reach them." He had no idea it was impossible. Between October 1944 and February 1945, Japanese air defense doctrine evolved through desperation. First, fly higher. Pilots pushed their fighters to service ceilings and beyond, engines gasping, airframes shuddering, men passing out in their cockpits. The Zero's rated ceiling was 10,000 meters. Pilots routinely attempted 10, 500, 11,000 zern. Engines seized, wings iced over, men died. Second, fly faster. If they couldn't reach B-29 altitude, maybe they could climb quickly enough to make a single slashing attack before oxygen starvation set in. Pilots practiced vertical climbs, trading speed for altitude. Arriving at interception point with empty lungs and failing vision, firing blindly at silver shapes they could barely see. Third, fly in groups. If one pilot blacked out, his wingman might continue the attack. Squadron tactics became survival tactics, mutual support at altitude, someone to watch you die. None of it worked. December 3, 1944, Lieutenant Yoshio Yoshida, 22 years old, from Hokkaido. Experienced pilot, 31 victories, intercepted a B-29 formation at 600 meters, made a single firing pass, radioed, "I can't breathe," and spun into Tokyo Bay. Aircraft intact, pilot dead from hypoxia, December 13, 1944. Captain Takeo Tanemizu, 26 years old, from Kyoto. Flight commander, 45 victories, decorated twice. Climbed to 100 meters chasing a lone B-29, blacked out. Wingman watched him tumble for 800 meters before impact. No parachute. Tanemizu never regained consciousness. December 27, 1944. Flight warrant officer Kiyoshi Ito, 19 years old, from Osaka. New pilot, only 8 victories, eager to prove himself. Pushed his 0 to 10 400 meters, 200 meters past its rated ceiling. Engine seized, oxygen system failed. Ito radioed his position, said, "I'm sorry," and crashed into a forest north of Tokyo. All the same way, all at altitude, all against an enemy that didn't fire a shot. Sakai studied the pattern. He interviewed surviving pilots, read mission reports, examined wreckage when he could. The Americans had some advantage beyond altitude performance, something that let them operate where Japanese fighters died just trying to exist. One night in January 1945, Sakai found a captured American technical manual in the intelligence office. Partial translation, poor quality, pages missing. But one section remained intact. Cabin pressurization system, Boeing B-29 Superfortress. He read it 3 times. The Americans weren't struggling at altitude, they weren't suffering, they were comfortable. Their aircraft maintained ground-level pressure at 30,000 feet. Their oxygen was heated, their cabins warm. They flew in an artificial environment, while Japanese pilots clawed at a hostile one. It wasn't a fair fight. It had never been a fair fight. Sakai sat in the dark office reading by flashlight, understanding for the first time that no amount of courage, no level of skill, no tactical innovation could overcome this technological gulf. The B-29 existed in a different realm, protected, insulated, untouchable. But knowing didn't help. Understanding the enemy's advantage didn't create a solution. Japanese industry couldn't build pressurized fighters. They barely had enough aluminum for standard aircraft production. Retrofit technology didn't exist, and even if it did, Japan had months left, not years. Sakai folded the manual closed and returned it to the file. He walked outside. Overhead, the night sky was clear. Somewhere up there, 30,000 feet above, B-29s were crossing Japanese airspace, invisible, invulnerable, inevitable. "Nishizawa," he said quietly to the stars, "we never had a chance." The desperation produced variations. Not solutions, variations. Attempts to work around a problem that had no tactical answer. Some pilots tried flying above the B-29 formations, hoping to dive through them with built-up speed, make a single attack, and escape below before hypoxia set in. It required timing, calculation, and oxygen management that few could execute. Most blacked out during the dive, plummeting past their targets unconscious. Others attempted frontal attacks, head-on passes that maximized closing speed and minimized time at killing altitude. But B-29s flew in tight formations. Their combined defensive fire created walls of lead. Pilots who survived the oxygen deprivation usually died to gunfire. A few tried night intercepts, hoping darkness would hide their approach and reduce the need for prolonged altitude exposure. But B-29s had radar operators, and night flying at 30,000 feet meant navigating by instruments while hypoxic, a recipe for spatial disorientation and fatal mistakes. The modifications escalated. Ground crews began installing oxygen bottles scavenged from multiple aircraft into single fighters, giving pilots double or triple the normal supply. It helped, marginally. An extra 60 seconds at altitude before unconsciousness. Enough time for one more burst of gunfire before the grey tunnel closed in. They tried electric heating systems, wiring crude cockpit heaters that drew power from the aircraft's electrical system. Most failed at altitude, drained batteries, or caught fire. A few worked. Pilots reported being able to feel their fingers for an extra minute or two before numbness set in. Some squadrons experimented with high-altitude breathing techniques, hyperventilation before climbing, controlled breathing during ascent, shallow gasps at altitude to conserve oxygen. It was desperation disguised as science. Hyperventilation caused its own problems: dizziness, confusion, premature loss of consciousness. Flight Warrant Officer Tetsuzo Iwamoto, 25 years old from Shimane, tried everything. Double oxygen bottles, electric gloves, pre-breathing pure oxygen for 30 minutes before takeoff. On January 27, 1945, he intercepted a B-29 at 10,200 meters and stayed conscious long enough to fire 200 rounds into its port wing. The bomber continued on course. Iwamoto blacked out, recovered at 400 meters, and landed with frostbite on 8 fingers. His squadron leader asked if the tactics worked. "I didn't pass out," Iwamoto said, hands wrapped in bandages, "but I didn't stop it either." The mathematics were brutal. Between November 1944 and March 1945, the 302nd Fighter Squadron, one of Japan's elite air defense units, logged 384 B-29 interception sorties. They shot down 12 bombers. They lost 67 pilots. A negative attrition rate. Every month, the squadron shrank. By February 1945, they had more aircraft than qualified pilots. The Americans noticed. Intelligence officers interviewed captured Japanese pilots, studied wreckage, read decoded communications. They realized Japanese fighters were dying from altitude exposure, not American gunners. So they flew higher. Standard operating altitude increased from 30,000 to 32,000 feet in January 1945, just to widen the gap. It worked. Japanese interception rates dropped from 5% to less than 2%. What the Americans didn't anticipate, what no amount of intelligence predicted, was Japanese desperation's final form. March 9, 1945. 11:30 p.m. Tokyo. Sakai scrambles his Zero from Chofu Airfield, joining 34 other fighters launching into darkness. But something is different tonight. The air raid sirens started early. The radar reports showed B-29s approaching from the south, not at 30,000 feet. At 7,000 feet, low altitude, night attack, no altitude advantage. Sakai's radio crackles. All fighters, targets at 2,000 meters. Repeat, 2,000 meters. This is not an error. For the first time in 4 months, Japanese fighters would meet B-29s on equal terms. The Americans had changed tactics. Instead of high-altitude precision bombing, which required daylight and good weather, they switched to low-altitude incendiary attacks at night. The goal wasn't accuracy. It was fire. Burn Tokyo. Burn Osaka. Burn every Japanese city until surrender became inevitable. But flying low meant vulnerability. No pressurization advantage, no oxygen sanctuary. B-29s at 7,000 feet could be intercepted by any Japanese fighter. Sakai climbs through darkness, watching searchlights sweep the sky. He spots the first B-29 at 2,100 meters, a massive dark shape sliding through searchlight beams, belly doors open, incendiary clusters tumbling out. He doesn't think about Nishizawa, doesn't think about the 67 pilots his squadron lost trying to reach these bombers at altitude. He lines up the shot, calculates deflection and fires. The B-29's port engines burst into flame. The bomber rolls left, losing altitude, trailing fire. Sakai pulls up and away, adrenaline surging. After months of futility, of watching friends die in futile climbs, he'd just damaged a B-29 in a way that mattered. That night, Japanese fighters shot down 14 B-29s over Tokyo, the highest single-night loss rate of the entire campaign. American crews reported intense fighter opposition, accurate anti-aircraft fire, and coordinated night attacks they'd never experienced at high altitude. But Tokyo burned anyway. 665 tons of incendiaries turned 16 square miles of the city into ash. 100,000 civilians dead. 1,000,000 homeless. The most destructive air raid in human history. 14 B-29s lost. 325 returned to base. The tactical victory meant nothing. The strategic loss was absolute. February 17, 1945. 2:14 p.m., 28,000 feet above Yokohama. Flight Warrant Officer Kaname Harada pushes his Kawasaki Ki-61 Tony fighter into a climbing turn, watching his airspeed bleed away as altitude increases. The engine coughs, thin air, struggling combustion. His altimeter reads 8,500 meters. The B-29 formation is at 9,200 meters, still climbing. Harada is 23 years old, from a farming family in Nagano Prefecture, the same region where Nishizawa dreamed of his apple orchard. He'd never seen an airplane until he joined the army in 1942. Now he's attempting something impossible. Intercept a bomber flying 700 meters above his fighter's rated service ceiling. His oxygen mask delivers nothing but ice crystals. He sucks hard, tasting frozen rubber and his own panic. The B-29s slide across his canopy, 12 silver crosses in perfect formation, sun glinting off plexiglass noses. Absolutely untouchable. Harada's wingman, Sergeant Fumio Nakano, radios, "I can't. Breathe properly. Vision is..." The transmission cuts off. Harada glances right. Nakano's Ki-61 is rolling inverted, nose dropping. No smoke, no damage, just a fighter tumbling through thin air with an unconscious pilot inside. Harada watches his friend fall for 3 seconds. Standard procedure says break off, descend, survive. Then he looks back up at the B-29s. Not today, he whispers into his frozen mask. He shoves the throttle past the overboost detent, a setting marked in red, prohibited except in emergency. The engine screams. His airspeed increases slightly. The altimeter creeps upward. 600 meters. 700 meters. The engine temperature gauge slides into the red zone. His vision narrows. The instrument panel blurs. He counts his heartbeats. They're too slow. Then too fast. Then he loses count. His left hand goes numb on the throttle. He can't feel his feet on the rudder pedals. 800 meters. The B-29s are 400 meters above him now. He can see details. Open bomb bay doors, turrets tracking, sunlight through propeller arcs. He imagines the crews inside, warm, breathing easily, probably drinking coffee. The thought fills him with rage so pure it cuts through the hypoxia. He pulls the nose up another 3 degrees. The fighter shudders, on the edge of stalling. His vision is a grey tunnel with the B-29s at the center, everything else gone dark. 900 meters. His right arm won't move properly. He tries to thumb the gun button, but his muscles won't respond. The B-29s are 300 meters above. So close. Close enough to see individual rivets on the fuselage skin, but not close enough to shoot. The grey tunnel collapses to a pinpoint. Harada's last conscious thought is crystalline. I'm going to die without firing a single round. His head drops forward. His hand falls off the throttle. The Ki-61 stalls, flips inverted, and begins a flat spin. Inside the lead B-29, tail gunner Staff Sergeant Robert Morrison from Portland, Oregon, watches the Japanese fighter tumble away. He'd been tracking it for 3 minutes, watching it climb desperately, watching it fall short. Another one lost it, Morrison says over the intercom. Spinning down, no shoot. How many's that today? The pilot asks. 3rd one I've seen. They're trying like hell, but they just can't get up here. Good, the pilot says. Keep watching anyway. Morrison returns to scanning the sky. The B-29 continues on course, pressurized cabin maintaining comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit, oxygen flowing pure and warm. Below, a Japanese pilot tumbles toward Earth, unconscious in a fighter that's become his coffin. Harada wakes at 200 meters. The spin has him disoriented. Sky and Earth trading places, horizon meaningless. His training takes over. Neutralize controls, reduce throttle, recover from spin. The Ki-61 responds. He pulls out of the dive at 800 meters, engine smoking, airframe groaning from stress. His radio crackles. Harada, are you alive? It's his squadron leader, Captain Anabuki, flying below the interception altitude. I'm alive, Harada responds. His voice sounds distant, disconnected. I couldn't reach them. I saw return to base. What about Nakano? Silence on the radio. Then, he didn't recover. Impact 4 minutes ago. Harada looks at his fuel gauge, enough to reach base barely. He turns southwest, hands still shaking, vision still spotted with grey. Through his canopy, he watches the B-29 formation continue north. Unscathed, untroubled, already beginning their bomb run over Yokohama. He lands at Chofu Airfield 40 minutes later. Ground crews swarm the Ki-61, checking for damage. The engine is ruined, overheated past tolerance, cylinder heads cracked, likely good for scrap metal now. Maintenance Chief Takahashi walks around the aircraft, shaking his head. You redlined it? Yes. How high did you get? 900 meters, maybe 950. Takahashi looks up at the sky. The B-29s fly at 500. You were still 500 meters short. I know. This engine is destroyed. You know that too. Harada nods. He's still sitting in the cockpit, too exhausted to climb out. His fingers are white. Frostbite, probably superficial. His lips are cracked and bleeding from the oxygen mask. Nakano died trying the same thing, Harada says quietly. He didn't destroy his engine. He just died. Takahashi stops inspecting the aircraft. He looks at Harada, really looks at him. You kids are fighting something we can't fix with mechanics, you understand that? I understand we have to try anyway. That night, in the barracks, Harada writes a letter to Nakano's family in Osaka. He describes Fumio as brave, skilled, dedicated, all the proper words. He doesn't mention that his friend suffocated chasing an enemy he could never catch. He doesn't mention the B-29 crews probably never knew a fighter was trying to intercept them. He seals the letter, addresses it carefully, and places it with 6 others he's written in the past month, all to families of pilots who died at altitude, all saying the same lies about honorable combat. Harada returns to his bunk. Above him, through the barracks window, stars are visible. Clear night, good bombing weather. By tomorrow morning, more B-29s will cross Japanese airspace. More pilots will attempt interception. More fighters will climb toward altitudes where men can't breathe, and the bombers will continue on course, pressurized and comfortable, existing in a sanctuary that courage cannot penetrate. Harada closes his eyes. He thinks about Nagano Prefecture, about apple orchards, about a different life where farmers' sons stay farmers, where breathing doesn't require technology, where the sky isn't divided into zones where some men can live and others suffocate. He thinks about trying again tomorrow, because what else can they do? American commanders learned. After March 9th, they continued low-altitude night attacks, accepting higher losses in exchange for devastating fire damage. Japanese fighters intercepted effectively for the first time. Between March and August 1945, they shot down 147 B-29s, more than the previous 8 months combined. But the math remained impossible. For every B-29 destroyed, 2 more arrived from the Marianas. American production delivered 16 new superfortresses per day. Japan couldn't replace pilots, couldn't repair cities, couldn't manufacture aircraft fast enough to matter. Sakai flew 23 interception missions between March and August 1945. He shot down 3 B-29s, confirmed kills witnessed by ground observers. His squadron was credited with 31 total. They lost 42 pilots during the same period. No official commendation, no medals. Just a notation in squadron records. Flight Lieutenant Sakai, combat operations, satisfactory performance. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced surrender via radio broadcast. Sakai listened in the squadron ready room with 11 surviving pilots, all that remained of a unit that started the war with 64. "It's over," someone said. Sakai nodded. He thought about Nishizawa's apple orchard in Nagano, about the promise they'd made, about cold cockpits at 10,000 meters and silver bombers that flew where no one could follow. He folded his flight suit, placed it in his locker, and walked outside. The sky was empty. No B-29s, no fighters, just clouds and silence. After the war, Sakai returned to Saga Prefecture. He took a job at a printing company, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, operating a press that stamped out advertising flyers and business cards. His supervisor didn't know he'd been an ace. His co-workers didn't ask about the partial blindness in his right eye. He married in 1947, had 3 children, lived in a small house with a vegetable garden. On weekends, he rode his bicycle to the coast and watched fishing boats, the same boats his father had worked on before Sakai joined the Navy. He never talked about the war. In 1973, American aviation historian Martin Kaidin contacted Sakai while researching Japanese fighter tactics. Kaidin had interviewed several surviving pilots and heard Sakai's name repeatedly, always with respect, often with awe. He tracked Sakai to Saga and asked for an interview. They met at a small restaurant. Kaidin had prepared questions about dogfighting techniques, victory claims, famous battles. He expected war stories, tactical insights, maybe some bitterness about defeat. Instead, Sakai talked about altitude. "The B-29s," he said quietly, stirring tea. "We could never reach them." "Not really." "My friend Nishizawa, 87 victories, best pilot I ever knew. He died trying to climb high enough to fight them. Didn't get shot, just ran out of air." Kaidin asked why Japanese commanders kept sending fighters to impossible altitudes. "What else could we do?" Sakai replied. "Let them fly over unopposed? We had to try. Even if it killed us, we had to try." Kaiden asked if Sakai ever felt anger toward American technological superiority, pressurized cabins, better oxygen systems, heated cockpits. Sakai shook his head. They built a better aircraft. That's not unfair. That's engineering. What made me angry was sending boys up in fighters that couldn't breathe, knowing they'd black out before they fired a shot and calling it air defense. That was the crime, not what you did, what we did to our own. The interview ran 4 hours. Kaiden published excerpts in his 1978 book, Samurai, which became an international bestseller. Sakai became known, briefly famous, invited to aviation conferences, interviewed on television. He hated it. They want stories about shooting down wildcats over Guadalcanal, he told his wife. They don't want to hear about watching friends suffocate trying to intercept bombers. That's not dramatic enough. By 1980, the attention faded. Sakai returned to his quiet life, printing press, vegetable garden, bicycle rides to the coast. Historians still called occasionally. He was polite, brief, and never volunteered information. Saburo Sakai died on September 22, 2000, at age 84. Cause, natural causes, at home, surrounded by family. His obituary in the Saga Shimbun newspaper, local printing company employee, war veteran, survived by wife and 3 children. 108 words. It mentioned he'd served in the Navy. It didn't mention 64 confirmed aerial victories. It didn't mention surviving wounds that should have killed him. It didn't mention watching an entire generation of pilots die in frozen cockpits, chasing bombers they could never catch. A small memorial exists at Chofu Airfield, now a civilian airport serving Tokyo. A bronze plaque lists 121 names, pilots who died defending the city during the final months of the war. Nishizawa's name is there. Sakai's is not. He survived, so he wasn't included. No museum exhibit explains how pressurized cabins gave B-29s operational sanctuary at altitudes where Japanese fighters suffocated. No documentary covers the 219 pilots who died from hypoxia rather than enemy fire. No plaque commemorates the technological gap that made victory impossible before the first shot was fired. In 2008, Boeing aerospace engineers visited the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum to examine the restored B-29 Enola Gay. They marveled at the pressurization system, revolutionary for 1944, crude by modern standards but effective. One engineer asked the museum curator if Japanese pilots knew about the technology. Not until late in the war, the curator replied. By then, it was too late to matter. Must have been hell, the engineer said, running his hand along the fuselage, trying to fight something you couldn't reach. The curator nodded. A lot of them died trying. The engineer stood silent for a moment, looking at the bomber's silver skin. We should probably tell that story. Probably, the curator agreed. They never did. If this story moved you, if it made you understand the human cost of technological warfare, hit that like button. These stories disappear when we forget them. Subscribe to this channel. We bring you the real history, the forgotten voices, the battles that textbooks skip, and drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Did your grandfather serve in World War II? Do you have a connection to this history? We have viewers from around the world, and every comment keeps these memories alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. These men died fighting an enemy they couldn't touch, in a war they couldn't win, for a country that barely acknowledged their sacrifice. The least we can do is remember their names.